The city streets buzzed with life as people hurried past, too busy to notice the quiet man sitting by the sidewalk. His belongings, just a small cart filled with a few worn-out blankets, some food scraps, and a couple of cherished keepsakes, were all he had. He never asked for much, just kindness, just a little dignity. But not everyone saw him that way. A young man in a crisp uniform strutted down the sidewalk, his polished shoes tapping against the pavement. He worked at the cafe across the street, a place where customers came and went without a second glance at the man sitting nearby. But today, something in the worker's eyes was different, cruel amusement. With a smirk, he stopped in front of the homeless man, sneering down at him. "Get out of here!" he spat. "You're making this place look bad." The man didn't say a word. He simply adjusted his cart, trying to shrink into himself, trying not to be a problem. But that only seemed to make the worker angrier. Without warning, the worker lifted his foot and kicked the cart over. The few belongings tumbled onto the street, his food scattered, his blankets dragged into the gutter. People nearby gasped, some pausing for just a second before continuing on with their day. The worker laughed, shaking his head as if he had done the world a favor. But what he didn't know was that someone had seen everything. Someone who had the power to change his life forever. And that someone? His own boss. The worker, still chuckling to himself, didn't notice the figure standing a few feet away, frozen in place. The boss had just stepped out of the cafe to take a break, unaware that the seemingly harmless employee was about to spiral into a much larger mess. The boss, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, had been walking across the street when the sound of the cart crashing to the ground caught her attention. She paused for a moment, noticing the anger in the worker's posture, the way he kicked at the overturned cart as if it were some kind of game. She approached slowly, her eyes narrowing with each step. Her shoes clicked sharply against the pavement, a sound that made the worker flinch just slightly. He turned, recognizing the boss instantly. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her voice even yet laced with something that hinted at concern. The worker, still holding onto his smug smile, wiped his hands on his uniform. "Yeah, no problem. Just, giving this guy a little push. You know, cleaning up the street." He glanced at the homeless man who was now crouched by the cart, fumbling with the things that had spilled. The worker tried to look nonchalant, but the boss could see the tension in his posture. The homeless man's face was a mixture of shame and disbelief. His hands trembled as he tried to gather what little he had left. His eyes flicked up at the boss for a moment, before quickly looking away. He didn't want to cause trouble. He wasn't even sure how to ask for help anymore. The boss studied the worker's face for a beat longer. Something wasn't right. She had known him for a while now, had seen him in the cafe, seen him interact with customers, always so polished, always so friendly. But now, standing there with the cart scattered on the pavement and the homeless man quietly cleaning up, she saw a side of him she hadn't expected. She crossed her arms. "You think it's okay to treat people like that?" The worker faltered for a second, his smile fading. "It's just a cart, boss. It's not like he was doing any harm." The boss took a step closer. She was used to handling difficult situations, but something about this felt different, darker. She had seen the worker interact with others before, but never like this. It wasn't just a random act of disrespect, there was something deeper, something personal about the way he had treated the man. She turned her attention to the homeless man, who was still struggling to pick up his things. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone softening. The man didn't answer at first. He was trying to collect himself, trying to hold on to what little pride he had left. He knew better than to speak up, knew it would only make things worse. The boss waited, giving him space to respond. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I'm fine, don't worry about me." The worker rolled his eyes. "See? He's fine. No harm done." But the boss wasn't convinced. She could see the frustration on the man's face, the way he was desperately trying to maintain some shred of dignity. She knew this wasn't just about a cart. This was about something deeper, something that had been building up for a long time. "What's your name?" The boss asked the homeless man, ignoring the worker's uncomfortable shift beside her. The man hesitated, then quietly replied, I don't have one. She nodded, understanding more than he realized. He didn't have an address, didn't have a family to call, didn't have anyone to care for him. But that didn't mean he deserved to be treated like this. Listen, the boss said, turning back to the worker. You're going to help him pick this up. Now. The worker's face flushed with anger. What? You can't be serious. I don't have time for this. I don't care, she said firmly. Pick up the cart. Now. The tension in the air grew thick, the worker's jaw clenched as he glared at the boss. But slowly, begrudgingly, he knelt down and began to help. The homeless man didn't say anything, just watched as the worker's hands reluctantly scooped up his few belongings. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Meanwhile, the boss stood silently, her mind racing. She couldn't just let this go, not after seeing how easily the worker had dismissed the man. It wasn't about the cart or the small scene, it was about the deeper issue at play. What kind of person treats someone like this, especially someone so vulnerable? She had worked with people from all walks of life, but something about the worker's attitude unsettled her. As the worker finished putting the cart back together, he stood up, clearly ready to walk away. But the boss wasn't done yet. You're going to do more than just help him pick up his things, she said, her voice cold. You're going to make it right. The worker turned, confusion clouding his features. What are you talking about? You're going to find a way to help him, the boss said. You're going to make sure he gets the support he needs? Maybe you can start by offering him something to eat from the cafe. Maybe you can help him find shelter. You're going to take responsibility for what you just did. The worker's face twisted with annoyance. I don't have time for this, okay? It's not my problem. That's where you're wrong, the boss replied, her voice unwavering. It is your problem now. And if you don't help, you're going to find yourself out of a job. The worker scoffed, but the seriousness in her eyes made him hesitate. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his tongue. Before he could say anything else, the boss turned her attention back to the homeless man. I'm sorry about all this, she said, her voice softer now. I know it's not much, but if you need anything, I'll help however I can. The homeless man didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, as if the words were more than just words to him. They were a promise that someone cared, that he wasn't invisible. The worker stood there, his gaze flicking between the boss and the man. He wasn't sure what to make of this situation. All he had wanted was to get rid of the inconvenience, to have things go back to normal. But now he was stuck. He didn't know how to fix this, how to make up for what he had done. He had made a mess, and no matter how much he wanted to walk away, he couldn't. The tension between them was palpable, and the city around them felt like it had frozen in time. The boss's gaze didn't waver, and neither did the worker's reluctant stance. The homeless man, for his part, had fallen silent once again, his quiet presence a reminder of everything the worker had overlooked. But as the minutes ticked by, the question lingered, would the worker rise to the challenge, or would he double down on his actions? Would the boss's attempt to teach him a lesson work, or was this moment just another in a long line of missed opportunities? For now, nothing was certain. The standoff between the worker and his boss continued, the tension in the air thick with unspoken words. The homeless man, having picked up what little remained of his belongings, stood up slowly. He had barely spoken, but something about the way the boss had handled the situation felt different. He wasn't used to kindness, especially not from people in positions of power. Most of the time, he was ignored, or worse, dismissed as if he didn't matter. But today, someone had seen him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that he was still a person, still worthy of dignity. The worker glanced down at his uniform, clearly uncomfortable, clearly trying to find a way out of this situation. He could feel the boss's eyes on him, watching every move. He opened his mouth, ready to protest again, but the words caught in his throat. He had never been confronted like this before, certainly never in front of others. The boss wasn't going to let him off the hook. She was holding him accountable for his actions, and something about that made him uneasy. I can't just drop everything, he stammered, his defiance slipping. I have work to do. I'm not some kind of social worker. I can't fix this. The boss, standing firm, folded her arms across her chest. This isn't about fixing anything. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves respect, whether they have a job, a home, or not. And it's about taking responsibility for your actions, even when no one else is watching. The worker shifted, still uncertain how to respond. He wanted to argue, to explain himself, but somehow the words wouldn't come. Instead, he looked at the homeless man, whose tired eyes met his for the first time since the incident. There was no anger in those eyes, just a quiet acceptance, a kind of resignation that stunned the worker more than he cared to admit. The boss softened her tone. I'm not asking you to change the world, but I am asking you to make things right here. Right now. For a moment, the worker just stood there, his mind racing. It wasn't just about the homeless man. It wasn't even about the boss anymore. It was about something deeper, a shift in the way he saw the world. For the first time, he realized how easy it had been for him to treat people like the homeless man as invisible. They didn't matter. They were out of sight, out of mind. But the reality was staring him in the face, and it was something he couldn't ignore anymore. With a heavy sigh, he finally spoke. Okay, hey. What do you want me to do? The boss nodded, clearly pleased with the shift in his attitude. Start by offering him something to eat. Something hot. We've got food inside the cafe. Get him a meal. The worker didn't need to be told twice. He turned and walked toward the cafe, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. As he went inside, he heard the boss call out to the homeless man. You don't have to go anywhere. Stay right here. We'll bring the food to you. The homeless man nodded, but there was still that quiet skepticism in his eyes. He had seen people offer help before, only to pull away just as quickly. It was hard to believe that someone would actually follow through. But for some reason, something about the boss's voice told him this time would be different. Inside the cafe, the worker moved quickly, pulling together a warm meal from the kitchen. He could feel his nerves prickling, as though every step he took was being watched. But he didn't mind. There was no way out of this now. When he returned with the food, he handed it to the homeless man, who accepted it without a word. For a moment, the worker stood there, unsure what to say. But the homeless man's eyes were locked on the meal, and the faintest smile tugged at his lips. Thank you, the man finally said, his voice hoarse but genuine. You didn't have to do this. The worker nodded, but his throat was tight. There was something about the simplicity of the gesture, the way it changed everything that hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just about food. It was about dignity. It was about the homeless man being seen as more than just a problem to be ignored. As he stepped back, the boss joined them, standing silently beside the worker. She gave him a subtle nod, acknowledging that he had taken the first step toward doing what was right. But she knew that this moment wasn't enough. It couldn't just be a one-time gesture. For the worker to truly understand, for him to truly change, there needed to be more. It wasn't just about the meal. It was about the realization that he had a responsibility to those around him, to everyone, not just those who could offer him something in return. You're going to keep doing this, the boss said, her gaze fixed on the worker. Not just today. You're going to keep offering help, keep being there for people who need it. If you don't, I won't be able to keep you on here. This place is about more than just serving food. It's about making people feel welcome. All people. The worker nodded, the gravity of her words sinking in. He had never thought about it that way. He had always seen his job as something separate from the world outside. But now, with the homeless man sitting before him, the line between the two seemed thinner than ever. As the homeless man began to eat, the boss gave a small, encouraging smile. And you, sir, she said, addressing the homeless man with a kindness that caught him off guard. If you ever need anything else, we're here. We don't turn people away. The homeless man looked up, his eyes brightening just slightly. It was a small thing, but it meant more than he could express. As the worker returned to his duties, the weight of the past few minutes stayed with him. He had never been someone who thought much about others beyond the surface. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the encounter, he couldn't help but wonder how many times he had missed the opportunity to make a difference. How many times had he walked past someone like the man sitting at the table, not even seeing them? It wasn't just about helping in the moment. It was about recognizing that everyone, no matter their situation, deserved a basic level of respect. The worker didn't have all the answers. He didn't even know if he was ready to make a full change. But one thing was certain, he would never see the world the same way again. As the day wore on, the cafe bustled with its usual crowd, but there was something different in the air, a subtle shift, a change that didn't need to be spoken. The boss had done more than just manage the situation. She had opened the door for growth, for understanding. The worker had taken his first step toward a new perspective, one where compassion wasn't a choice, it was a responsibility. The homeless man finished his meal, and after a moment of silence, he stood up to leave. He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. The simple act of being treated with dignity, of being given a chance, was enough for him. Before he left, he turned to the boss and the worker, offering a nod of gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, then walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the crowd. The worker watched him go, the lingering weight of their encounter still hanging in the air. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose. It wasn't just about serving coffee or cleaning tables. It was about showing up for people, showing up for each other, in ways that mattered. The lesson, though subtle, had landed. "Oh,